All right. Well, good to get our Zoom classes going again, and I wanted to focus attention um, the next several weeks on the Proverbs, particularly assignments, because while Proverbs is poetic, it uses all the elements of poetry we've talked about. Um, that were applied to the Psalms. There are some other distinctions with the wisdom literature that it's important to understand. So, in some ways, we're going to approach the study of the text in Proverbs similarly as we did to the Psalms, but then we also need to be aware of a few important distinctions and um, not so much differences, but other aspects of wisdom literature that we need to be aware of. And so, really, this module is not just poetry, it's poetry and wisdom literature. So, all the wisdom literature, the wisdom books, Proverbs, of course, Ecclesiastes, Job, songs, those implement or use poetic expressions, but the manner in which they uh, describe biblical truth is there are some things to be aware of. So we'll cover that as we go through, but I basically wanted to do it in terms of just looking at each assignment, sort of reviewing some things about that particular assignment, which will then cover the specific topics for that assignment. And then also, to provide you guys an opportunity if you have questions about your passage or any other questions that feel free to ask as we go along. But I wanted to begin by um, focusing attention on just where we're at schedule wise, and even just as an encouragement that um, we're turning the corner here as far as where we're at. So for today's class, I wanted to discuss the class and the assignment schedule just to give you a little bit of big picture where we're at, and then review the assignment 3.15, which is the first assignment for Proverbs, the background and the context of Proverbs. So that's the plan for this morning. As far as the class schedule, let me see, I'm going to put the whole thing up here. The next couple months, probably 6, 7 Zoom classes we're going to have together to go through those Proverbs assignments and make sure everything's clear with that so you can be prepared and ready to preach your Proverbs passage as well. Um, June 7th would be the deadline for all the Module 3 assignments when those are all due. That will be both your Psalms and your Proverbs passages, all the assignments for those, as well as the reading. And then we have our module on June 16th to 20th. So it'll be module 4. So we're turning a corner. Module 4 in class, which covers the prophetic genre. And then, as usual, we'll have the preaching lab as part of that week as well, where we'll preach through the Psalms and the Proverbs passages together. All right, you have one assigned Psalm passage, one assigned Proverbs passage. And so we'll go through those as well and introduce the prophetic genre. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then basically from then July through November, we'll have try to do Zoom classes together or review assignments, things like that. Then tentatively, still need to get confirmation, but I think December 1st to 5th, that first week in December, I think we're planning to do Module 5. I'll confirm that with you guys as it gets closer, but I'm just trying to give you an idea right now so you can be thinking as far as your schedule for the year. Then we'll have our Zoom classes for Module 5 following that. And then, Lord willing, next May, so not just a little bit more than a year from now, so it's getting close. We'll have our last module together, Module 6 on pastoral ministry. You'll have a sermon, just one sermon, in that case, from the pastorals. So not two, you only have to prepare for one sermon. And then right after the class that week, those who've completed their assignments, passed each module, will have our graduation right after that on the Saturday at the end of the week. So that's just, like I said, a little over a year away. So keep keep focused on it, guys. You're turning the corner, kind of almost going around down the hill now. We'll be just a few modules left, and be able to finish up together. So that's just this gives you a general, a rough idea of what we're doing, where things are going for the next 14 months or so. All right, so Lord willing, that's the plan. So for now, just stay focused on Module 3. And if you've got some assignments for Module 1 or 2 you need to finish up, make sure to do that as well. But right now, the focus is getting your Psalms and Proverbs passages ready for preaching in June 16 through 20. That's Monday to Friday. And we'll be covering that together there. So any questions about the schedule? Again, this is tentative, right? Man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. So we're not going to presume, but at least I'm planning the way here. How the Lord directs our steps, we'll see. But this is just wanted to give you an idea of where we're headed. All right. I like that one as well. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, let's move forward to our assignment. And really, this assignment's a little bit different. You know, as I mentioned before, when we went in class, and as you guys know, for your Psalms passage, we don't study the whole book of Psalms because it's a collection of independent poems. So you were able to go right to your psalm and begin studying this, just the background of that psalm, and then going through the psalm in particular. Proverbs, though, is different. Proverbs is a book with one primary author, and there is a purpose and a flow within the book, though it is still unique compared to other biblical books, because in Proverbs you do have this collection of these short proverb statements in the book. So I wanted to review a couple of those things with you. But so the assignment, though, this assignment is going to cover sort of those first 3 steps that you normally do when you study a whole book. So remember that when we study a book, our approach is first we read through the book and make observations. So we're getting familiar with the book. And then the second step was to do the background context of the book, the setting of the book. Who wrote it? To whom did he write it? Why did he write it? Do we know when he wrote it? What people are mentioned, places. So that background information. So that's the second step. And then the third step is what we call the contextual flow of the book. That is, how does each section of the book connect to one another? And that is we called it the contextual flow, or the literary context. So really what we're doing in this assignment is essentially these 4 steps. Read the book, make observations, identify the background context, and then the literary context or contextual flow. Now, because Proverbs is a little bit different in the sense that the way it's structured is chapters 1 through 9 are these extended poems. All right, so they're almost like the full chapters, one poem that has a particular theme and flow. Then when we get to Proverbs 10, we have this shift, right, into those short proverbial statements. If you guys remember, we called those, anyone remember what those are called? Those 1 or 2 verse statements? Aphorism. So those are called aphorisms, where they're just these short statements. And the challenge is they don't connect to each other typically in chapters 10 and following. They can be on 2 very different topics, one after the other. So there's not really a flow to them like we have perhaps like in a psalm. However, the first 9 chapters, each chapter is really an extended poem. And so that does have a flow and a theme and a focus like like one of the Psalms. Now, it's not a psalm, it still has different characteristics, but it is an extended poem. So, what I'm having you do for Proverbs is just on this assignment, I didn't ask you to read the whole book like we did be for other books, but I've asked you to do is read the first 9 chapters because those are the extended poems and they're connected to each other. There is a flow to these poems. There's a link to them. So what I want you to do is you'll read through those proverbs. So here, let me pull up the actual assignment. So here's the assignment that you have in on Canvas. And notice the first step, read Proverbs 1 to 9 several times in different translations. And again, remember that the purpose of the step is just getting familiar with the book. And so I didn't ask you to read all of Proverbs, but just the first 9 chapters. Because again, at chapter 10, it sort of shifts into these aphorisms, which don't really have a contextual flow to them. All right. They're still connected to the overall purpose of the book, but it's not given to us in a flow like we would have in other books. So just read the first 9 chapters is all I'm requiring, but read it several times. I should put at least 5 times in different translations. Let me make it 6. All right. And just note how many times you read it, but at least 6 times. Read through various translations. Okay. And then, again, to encourage active reading, to become familiar with the book, make observations from each chapter. So I've just asked you to make 5 general observations and ask 2 questions for each chapter. All right. So that's all you need to do. I would encourage you to make more observations. But remember, these general observations are just that. They're general things that you notice from within each chapter. Repeated words, connections, interesting things you notice. And again, ask 2 questions in addition to that from the text. Now, you're not summarizing verses from the passage. You're just taking notice of things, anything that sticks out to you. All right. This isn't an interpretive step. It's just an observation step. Where again, stuff might strike you. Oh, I noticed this same statement he made in chapter 3, or he seems to repeat this idea several times here. Or why does he say it this way? What does this mean in this verse? So that's all you're doing. So just make at least 5 observations for each chapter, along with 2 questions at least for each chapter. All right. So you're just going to do that for chapters 1 to 9. You're not doing it for the whole book. All right. Again, notice there in the instructions. And I haven't put space. Just make general observations for each chapter. And then I only put Proverbs 1 through 9. Okay. You can see there. So it's not that the rest of Proverbs isn't important, but as far as understanding sort of the flow of thought and seeing how Proverbs 1 to 9 are linked together, these extended poems, I just wanted you to focus on that. And also because your assigned passages are from just somewhere within those first 9 chapters. I didn't give anyone the passages beyond that because those would just be those aphorisms, and those are a lot harder to interpret because there's usually no contextual flow around it. So it's a little more challenging. But I just assigned you guys passages from the first 9 chapters because those are part of an extended poem. So it'd be a little easier. There's a flow, there's a context within the poem. All right. So for this step 1, you're just reading the first 9 chapters. Step 2, reading them several times. Step 2 will be making observations in those first 9 chapters, 5 each chapter with an additional 2 questions per chapter. All right. And again, this is nothing that we new that we've done general observations for both module 1 and module 2 to this point. So this isn't anything new. The only unique feature here is, again, I'm not telling you to do it for the whole book, like normally we would do for other books of the Bible. Okay, so Psalms and Proverbs are just the two unique books in this regard. And that, again, Psalms, we don't read the whole book and study the book as a whole because the poems are independent. And in Proverbs, um, it also has a unique feature of this difference between with these extended poems in the first 9 chapters and then these aphorisms in chapter 10 and following. Now, Proverbs does end with, in chapter 30, with these longer aphorisms. They're really not aphorisms, they're 3 or 4 verse long, short poems. And then Proverbs 31 is, again, a full extended poem. But I just have you focused on the first 9 chapters in this assignment. Questions on that? Does that make sense? Okay, good. And again, those first 9 chapters are linked together. They do focus on a particular theme, and so be thinking about that as you study your particular text. Okay. Now, once you've done that, you've read the Proverbs 1 through 9 several times, made observations. Now we want to look at the setting of the book, the background context of the book. And I talked a little bit about this the last day of class, but I know may not have remembered that. I know there was a lot of information we covered when we were together in that module, but I did spend a little bit of time on Proverbs. And so I wanted to just review or look at those first few verses of Proverbs again, because that provides a lot of information regarding the background of the book. So let's go back to Proverbs 1, and we'll just look at these first 7 verses. And I'm going to ask Alan. Good morning, brother. Alan, could you read verses 1 through 7 here for us?
Okay, Pastor Dave.
Thank you.
Proverbs chapter 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know, to understand the sayings of understanding, to receive discipline that leads to insight, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the youth knowledge and discretion. Let the wise man hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire guidance. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Ignorant fools despise wisdom and discipline.
Great. Thank you. All right. So before we take a look at this, let me remind you as we go back to the assignment here, the background context, step 3. Remember, we're going to be looking for the author, and what do we know about the author? The recipient, and what does the author say about the recipient? Social context, that's just names mentioned. Historical context, do we know when it was written? Geographical, what places are mentioned? Cultural, what do we know about the culture of the author, the recipients, their theology? And then finally, what was the purpose or reason for writing, the occasion? All right, so those are the things we're looking for here as we considering the background context or the setting of the book. So that said, going back and looking here at this introduction, we are given some information on some of these, some of this context, right? For example, what do we know about the author here? Are we given any information regarding the author of Proverbs? All right.
Which one?
Yeah. It's kind of like the epistles, right? It starts with the author, the Proverbs of Solomon. And just so it's clear which Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, that's Solomon. All right. Pretty, um, pretty direct, pretty straightforward, right? And then even I think that's repeated when we get to chapter 10, right? When there's that transition from the extended poems to the aphorisms. Notice this section starts off with the Proverbs of Solomon. All right. So again, repeats, reiterates who the author is. And if you remember, um, I can't remember in Kings, I think it is, it's Solomon was said he wrote, I think it was First Kings, let me see, 4. Uh, somewhere, First Kings 4:32. All right, notice here it says that Solomon wrote 3,000 proverbs, or spoke, sorry, and his songs were 1,005. It's interesting, exactly 1,005 songs. So um, he authored a number of proverbs, but not all of them made it into the book of Proverbs. There's not 3,000 proverbs in Proverbs, but some of them found their way in. Some were inspired scripture, and so I think it's pretty clear the author, primary author of Proverbs is Solomon. Now, we do have, of course, Proverbs 30. There's another name mentioned there, the words of Agur, the son of Jakeh. And so some believe this may have been a student of Solomon's. Um, typically wise men would often have those who would come around them to learn from them. We see that, through human history. You know, wise men or scholars of renown would tend to have disciples, those who would gather around them to learn. So it's believed possibly Agur was one such man. There is a statement in Kings, First Kings 4, back in chapter 4 there, verse 30, describing Solomon's wisdom, wiser than all men, and the renown of his name was in all the surrounding nations. So it's possible that he then attracted individuals that wanted to learn from him, but we don't know for sure. That's just a an hypothesis. Um, that would be, uh, consistent with the Proverbs being of Solomon. If this guy was one of his pupils, would follow in the same traditions as Solomon's wisdom. And then, of course, we know of Proverbs 31, which is one of these chapters that was actually authored by a woman. It says the words of King Lemuel, but it is really his mother's words that she taught to him. Some believe Lemuel is a pseudonym for Solomon. And I'm not going to get into the whole reasons that are given there, but it's possible it may have been Solomon. This is according to ancient Jewish tradition, that this was just another name for him. And if that is the case, then his mother is Bathsheba, and these would actually have been the words of Bathsheba that were taught to him. Again, we don't know for sure. That's one possibility. It's an interesting one to consider. But definitely chapters 1 to 29 are from Solomon. And then 30 may be from a disciple of his. 31 may be another reference to him as words taught to him by his mother. Okay. But all that said, the we still have a primary authorship here in Proverbs, and it's seen right at the beginning. Now, what do we know about Solomon? What are some things we know about him? What do you guys remember?
He has a lot of wives.
Yep, he's kind of known for that one, isn't he? Um, what was it? 700 wives and 300 concubines, or 307. I don't remember. Um, maybe that's why he had 1,005 songs. He had one song for each of them. I don't know, but um, yeah, he's definitely known for that aspect. And what was it about his wives? Not only the sin of polygamy, but what else happened in regards to Solomon's many wives that affected him? You guys remember what was the impact of that on his life?
Worship of other gods.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember from 1 Kings 11? Solomon loved many foreign women. So it wasn't just having a lot of wives, he had a lot of foreign wives, idol worshippers from all the different pagans around them, going against what God had said, right? Not to do that. And he did. Yeah, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. When he was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods. So this was sort of the sad testimony of Solomon's life, though he was the wisest man who lived up until Christ. He did not learn from them. Uh, what
So
other?
meaning, uh,
Yeah, go ahead.
so meaning it is not guaranteed that because you are a lot of wisdom, you are already safe from any temptation or whatsoever.
Yeah, good point. Exactly. In fact, he in another book he wrote, right, Ecclesiastes, he mentions that um, he explored many things in life, including wisdom, and did not find that satisfaction. So even in knowing, more than anyone else, being wiser than anyone else, that alone didn't bring him contentment. We need wisdom. We need to seek wisdom. Wisdom is a valuable and good thing. But Solomon, it's not an end to itself. That wisdom needs to lead us to living life God's way, how God's designed it. And obviously, Solomon did not continue in that, though we hope that Ecclesiastes demonstrated he did repent at the end of his life and went back to the Lord. But there are many years he wasted in pursuing vain things as a result of these, you know, relationships with these foreign women. All right. So we know a lot about Solomon. Any other details we know about him that you guys find interesting? Anything else that we know about this author?
In his Proverbs, he speaks a lot of about discipline, but um, it is so obvious that he was not able to pass it to his sons.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rehoboam, right, was the next king, and he did not, things did not turn out well for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine how many children he had? He had 1,000 wives. Ah, oh my goodness. Now, of course, the story's famous. How did he end up becoming the wisest man? Who remembers that account? What happened?
A dream from God. A dream, him asking wisdom, and he's coming in and going out.
Yeah, I remember. I think what was it? First Kings, was it 4 or 3? Yeah, chapter 3. Um, where yeah, he has a dream, and in that dream, God asks him, um, where is it here? Yeah. Yahweh appeared to Solomon in a dream at night. This is First Kings 3, verse 5. Ask what I should give to you. And then what's interesting, you have shown great loving kindness to your slave David, my father, um, according to how he walked before you. So now, Yahweh, you've made your slave king in place of my father. I'm a little child. I don't know how to go out or come in. So give your slave, verse 9, a listening heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil, for who's able to judge this glorious people of yours? Now, what's interesting is a question that came to my mind is, why did he know to ask for this? What prompted him to think of his need for wisdom,
He
discernment?
was he was advised by his father David.
Yes. Proverbs 4, Solomon tells us this. Um, I think some of you may even have this passage assigned to you. I can't remember, but right. Yancey, you want to go ahead and read? This is Proverbs 4. Can you read verses 1 to 7?
Okay. Hear, O sons, the discipline of a father, and pay attention that you may know understanding. For I give you sound learning. Do not forsake my instruction. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son before my mother, then he instructed me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Do not forget and do not turn away from the sayings of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, and with all your acquiring, acquire understanding.
Right. So here's an interesting. When I was a son to my father, tender and only son before my mother, he instructed me and said to me, and then he gives all this emphasis. His father, of course, is David, emphasized to Solomon the importance of wisdom, right? Really pounded it in. Acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Do not forget. Do not turn away from the sayings. Love her, she will guard you. And then he emphasized the beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. This is the chief pursuit you need to have. Prize her, she will exalt you, she will honor. And so Solomon took those words to heart. So when God asked him, what do you want? He knew exactly because of the faithfulness of his father to instruct him. And I find this an encouraging passage for us as fathers is really, are we pointing our children to the scriptures so that they learn wisdom? And actually, I'm reminded of uh, Timothy. Remember 2 Timothy 3, it describes there how from childhood he had been taught the scriptures by his mother and his grandmother. And then it says there, the scriptures that gave him wisdom unto salvation. And so I think it's an important reminder and encouragement to us as fathers to be consistently giving instruction to our children from the scriptures, which is the only source of true wisdom, right? It's not talking about worldly wisdom or, street smarts or this kind of thing. It's biblical wisdom. And again, wisdom is skill in living, right? It's applying God's truth, his principles to life. And so what I did with my kids, we emphasized, we did regular instruction with our children in the Word. We tried to do it each day, but sometimes it was hard to do that. But after we would eat a meal together, and then we would gather, and we would sing a song or two together, depending on their ages, what we would sing, and then I would go through a word from Scripture with them, and then we would memorize uh, uh, big passages together over time. My wife was very faithful in consistently helping them memorize Scripture, especially when they're young. They can remember it really well. And so we just made that sort of a regular routine in our home, to have a Bible time together, memorize Scripture together. When they got older, it was harder to do that. It's harder to get the family all together. So we would still spend time with the younger kids. The older kids, it was more difficult. But with them, I would spend time with them in the Proverbs, because that book was really written for youth, for young people, right? He keeps saying in there, "Oh, my sons, my son," right? So it's really written for youth, not little kids. I mean, little kids it can apply to. You can teach them that, but I think as their children get older, their need for wisdom and ability to understand. And so Proverbs really is a book for young adults, young people. And I think it's a really good one to have them focus on as they get older. It's good for anyone, any age, but I think that particular time in life. So encouragement is David took this approach with his son Solomon, and Solomon took it to heart, and that's what he asked for when God offered him anything. Quite amazing to have God of the universe ask you what you want, and he says, I need help, I need wisdom. So, in any case, questions, comments on that so far? These are the kinds of things you would just note down under the category of author, since we know the author is Solomon. Now, to whom did he write? Does he mention his primary audience here? Does anybody see any specific people mentioned here that this proverb, the book is addressed to, or the Proverbs of Solomon are addressed to?
My son.
There's no specific name, Pastor Dave.
Yeah, no specific name. Later
Uh,
on, he will say, my son. He repeats this a number of times. And then here even he says, to the youth in verse 4. Okay? So they're a key audience throughout Proverbs. He mentions a few other people or type of people. He doesn't mention a name specifically, but do you see any other people or groups of people that he refers to here in these first verses?
The wise man.
Yes. Let the wise man hear and increase in learning. And then a man of understanding, that's the parallel statement. And also he mentions to give prudence to the simple. All right. So notice here, he mentions the wise man and the simple. Now, interestingly, he mentions fools down here, but he doesn't address this to them. The book of Proverbs isn't for the fool. Why is that? What is a fool? What do you guys think? We have the three categories of people mentioned. Well, four if you include sons, but we have the wise, the fool, and the naive that are referred to in Proverbs throughout, or the simple. So you have the wise, those are the ones who are willing to listen and obey. The fool then is the opposite of that. What would a fool be?
Disobey.
Yeah, one who doesn't want to listen, right? Who doesn't want to obey. So a fool is in the Bible one who rejects God. Psalm 14, the fool said in his heart, there is no God. Right? So the Proverbs isn't addressed to the fool because the fool doesn't want to listen. All right? So it's addressed to the wise so that they may learn more wisdom because they're willing to listen and obey. It's addressed to the simple because the simple has not yet fallen into one of those two categories. He's the morally naive one. And so he's trying to appeal to the simple, which would be the youth, to take the path of the wise, not the path of the fool. All right. So these are the types of people that are mentioned here in Proverbs. Right. And again, they all come right from this introductory statement here of the Proverbs. Now, he also gives the purpose of the book. What was his intent? Why did he write these Proverbs? What do you guys see here?
To know wisdom and discipline.
Yes. Notice that to know wisdom and discipline, right? So this is a purpose statement. Understand the sayings. To give prudence.
Knowledge and discretion.
Yes. To give knowledge and discretion to the youth. To receive discipline, righteousness, justice, equity. So he has a number of things he mentions here, right? To know, to discern, to receive. So these are all elements of, as he gives this instruction, this is what he is desiring for them to gain from it. So we even have a purpose statement. Now, as you're thinking about background context, one of the elements was the historical context. So since we know who the author is, we know then about the time period the book or the Proverbs were written, right? During the lifetime of Solomon. So we have that idea when they were written down. And in the social context, you're just going to look for, there's not too many specific names mentioned, just categories of people like we saw here, the youth, the wise men. And then sometimes you will see places mentioned as geographical context. So just as you're doing those steps in the assignment and for doing those steps for the assignment, like for geographical, just read through the first 9 chapters. If you see any places mentioned, just put them there. Cultural context will just be then knowing that the recipients, these would be primarily the wise, the simple, the youth in Israel, because that would be the first audience. Of course, it applies universally as well. But what do we know about the culture of Israel at that time in Solomon's day. All right, so you just write a few things regarding that. And then we discuss the author's reason for the writing we just mentioned. And again, you can go to the syllabus, and in the appendix that discusses Proverbs, there's a lot of background information there for you. So it's pretty straightforward. Just take a look there. Now, the one thing that to remember, we covered this in class, but I want to reiterate it as you prepare and do your study and then even prepare for your messages, is that verse 7. Before Solomon gets to, he gets to the body, if you will, of the book, you know, like verse 8, it begins this extended poem that lasts from verse 8 to verse 33. That's the first extended poem. But before he starts that extended poem, notice he says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and discipline. So here he says, knowledge, wisdom, he said, I wrote this book to teach you wisdom, discipline, knowledge, discretion. But remember that it begins with fear of the Lord. It begins with a relationship with Yahweh, a relationship of humility and willingness to listen, right? Because he contrasts it with fools, right? Fools despise wisdom and discipline. But those who fear Yahweh, that's the foundation, that's the beginning of acquiring wisdom. And so we want to make sure, keep that in mind as you study and then prepare to preach from the Proverbs, is that these aren't just principles of life, to help you be more successful in your relationships and your business and, you know, uh, anything in life. It's really first begins with a relationship with God. And so we want to make sure it's really gospel rooted here. It's gospel oriented. The Proverbs are. And so make sure to remember that. That's where wisdom begins. Because you can teach a guy how to handle money. You can teach a person how to, have good communication in relationships, dealing with anger or what these things. But if it's not based upon the foundation of a relationship with God, then it's not really godly wisdom. And this is what Solomon found out, by the way. Do you remember at the end of Ecclesiastes what his summary statement was? He really focused it back on this very thing, didn't he? We go to Ecclesiastes 12. The end of the matter, all that has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the end of the matter. So it's the beginning and the end, right? He says in Proverbs, the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. Here he says that really the end of it is to fear God, keep his commandments. And so our understanding of passage from Proverbs, how we instruct from it, what we should learn from it, gain from it, all should bring us to this fear of Yahweh. It begins there as a basis and foundation, a relationship with God, and that's where it should lead us, is to further that relationship with God, to walk in his ways, fear God and keep his commandments. So make sure you keep that in mind as you study your particular passage in Proverbs. Don't separate it out from this importance of this relationship with God. Comments or questions on that or anything we've covered to this point?
None so far, Pastor Tim.
All right. That's
How
fine.
would
No
you,
problem. Sorry?
Pastor Tim, how would you balance like, or how would you deal with, for example, Solomon giving us very like profound wisdom, but how come he himself was not able to hold on to them? So how would you deal with that tension?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Pastor Dooney was kind of um, you know, talking about that a little earlier, some of the comments he made. Um, that just knowing what one ought to do and even knowing the value and importance of it and how to do it, there's still the element of needing to walk by the Spirit, right? We talks about in Galatians 5, walking in the flesh versus walking by the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, right? Self-control, um, versus the walking in the flesh. The deeds of the flesh are evident. Um, and so, Solomon really, though he knew the path of wisdom, though he was wise, it still gave into the desires of the flesh and didn't walk by the Spirit, essentially. I don't know. You guys got any other thoughts about that? It's an important question to consider. What do you guys think?
Maybe we also need, yes, of course, we need wisdom, but we need also discernment
Yeah.
in that particular.
Yep. Yeah, as
Yeah.
Solomon continued to add wife after wife and foreign wives, I mean, he wasn't being very discerning at that point. Um, and even though I'm sure he knew that he shouldn't be doing that, he he was pursuing the desires of the flesh, not the things of God. It's a, as we say, it's a cautionary tale, right? The importance for all of us to consider is knowing the truth is not exactly the same as living it out. It's necessary. You have to know it to live it out. But it's like James said, right? We need to prove to be doers, not just hearers. Doers of the word. Any other thoughts, reflections on that?
I think that is something that every Christians need to be aware of, that um, in every blessings or in every success that God has given us, there is always a danger behind it. Because first is that when person becomes so successful in life, then tendency is that the pride of life.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, good point. All right, that's great. Thank you for the question, Stephen. That was important. Okay, so as we consider this assignment. So that's really the background context. A lot of that, like I said, a lot of information is provided for you really in looking at the introduction of Proverbs in your syllabus. But go ahead and note that here. And then lastly is the contextual flow or the literary context. And here again, this will be a little different than what you did for epistles and narratives. Because in this case, again, I didn't have you go through every paragraph and summarize it. All I'm having you do here is I simplified it a little bit for you, and I just want you to summarize the chapter, okay? Because each of these, just from Proverbs 1 to 9, all right? Notice here, it's just Proverbs 1 to 9. So summarize, like I gave you an example for chapter 1. Solomon's purpose for writing Proverbs and the call for his sons to heed his wise instruction rather than listening to the enticing word of sinners. Okay? So again, this is an example of the summary. Now, you just do the same for the remaining chapters. Read through the chapter again several times and then see if you can come up with a summary of the main idea of that chapter. And again, each chapter from 1 to 9 is an extended poem focused on a main idea. So just summarize the chapter as a whole. You don't have to go through each stanza like you did for your psalm. Okay? So summarize each of the first 9 chapters. You don't have to do it for all the chapters in Proverbs because, again, remember, chapters 10 and following up to chapter 29 are these aphorisms. So it would be really impossible to summarize every chapter, except it would be, principles of wisdom, and that's it. But chapters 1 to 9 do have these extended poems with a particular theme and emphasis. So just summarize it in a sentence, not a paragraph, just one sentence in your own words, the main theme for each of those first 9 chapters. All right? And then what I want you to do, and this is important, is in a short paragraph, describe how your passage fits the author's flow of thought in those chapters. Okay? So, as I said, chapters 1 to 9 do center around sort of a main idea. They are linked together. And so, let's say you're assigned, something from Proverbs. You're assigned Proverbs chapter. Whoops, that's Song of Solomon. Proverbs. Say you're in chapter 3, and how does this? Let's say you're assigned a passage from this chapter. How does it tie into what's before and after it? So just give some thought to that. After you've summarized all 9 of those first chapters, those first 9 chapters, after you've summarized each of them, just kind of think, how does your passage that you've been assigned sort of maybe fit or connect to the theme of those 9 chapters? Okay? And just do it in a few sentences. And then that's the assignment. All right? So it's 5 steps, basically, the assignment. First step, read through Proverbs 1 through 9 at least 6 times. Second step, make observations, 5 general observations, and ask 2 questions for each chapter. All right? Just, again, get you familiar with Proverbs 1 through 9. And then the background information of the setting, as we discussed. You'll see most of it primarily from those first 7 verses. And then the literary context, step 4, just summarize each chapter, the main theme of each chapter in your own words and sentence. And then step 5, how does your assigned passage fit into the flow of those first 9 chapters? How does it connect? Okay? And that's it. That's the first assignment in Proverbs. Next week, Lord willing, we'll cover the next one, which will get into the specifics of your your passage. And it's going to follow essentially the same thing you did for the Psalms at that point. You'll look at the setting and structure of your assigned passage, your poem. You'll look at the parallelism, the imagery and poetic devices. Again, it'll be the same sort of analysis that you did for your psalm, except it'll be applied to Proverbs. And I'll go through an example of it with you from Proverbs 1, just to give you an idea. But those will be the next steps, the next assignments as we continue forward. All right. So with that, any questions about that? Anything we covered or anything else before I let you go a little early? My hope and intention over the next week or two is to get caught up on grading your assignments. So I've been negligent in doing that. I apologize for that. But my hope and plan is to give that more priority and attention the next couple weeks to get caught up. But you guys keep plowing, keep moving forward in your assignments, and we still have a couple months before we gather again, so there's still plenty of time. So if you are behind a little bit, you still have plenty of time to get caught up. If you just start applying yourself and get to work on these, you have enough time to get caught up by June. Again, June 16 to 20 is when we're going to gather for our next module together. All right. Well, thanks for making the time, guys. I hope the review was helpful. I'm really glad to be able to see you, and looking forward to meeting together these next several weeks, and then being able to meet face to face here in a couple months in June. All right.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brother Allen.
Dr. Tim.
Actually, Jason, can I ask you to close us in prayer, Jason?
Yes.